In the shadow of the Bavarian town of Hof, where medieval cobblestones still gleam with morning dew and timber-framed houses lean precariously against one another like drunken conspirators, a humble woodsman named Heinrich Schmidt found his destiny twisted by the cruel whims of power. The year was 1553, and the notorious Margrave Albrecht II of Brandenburg-Kulmbach, a man whose cruelty had become legend throughout the Holy Roman Empire, stood before a restless crowd, his voice cutting through the autumn air like the edge of an executioner's blade. The Margrave had discovered what he claimed to be an assassination plot against his person, and 3 men stood condemned to die. Yet in this moment of judicial theatre, a crucial player was absent: the official executioner. As the crowd shifted uneasily and the condemned men prayed their final prayers, Margrave Albrecht's eyes fell upon Heinrich Schmidt, a simple man whose calloused hands had known only the honest work of felling trees and shaping wood. "Execute these traitors," commanded the Margrave, his words heavy with the weight of absolute authority, "or join them in death." Heinrich Schmidt, faced with this terrible ultimatum, made the choice that would condemn his family line to generations of infamy. He stepped forward, accepted the executioner's sword, and in 3 swift strokes ended 3 lives and forever altered the trajectory of his bloodline. As one contemporary chronicle recorded, "Thus did an honest woodsman become an executioner by force of fear, and his son thereafter inherit the shameful profession." From that blood-soaked afternoon emerged not merely a reluctant executioner, but the father of perhaps the most documented and skilled practitioner of judicial death in the history of the Holy Roman Empire. Heinrich's son, Frantz Schmidt, born in 1554, would inherit more than his father's trade. He would inherit the complex web of social ostracism, professional pride, and moral ambiguity that defined the executioner's existence in late medieval Europe. Frantz Schmidt's journey from the son of a disgraced woodsman to Nuremberg's master executioner was neither swift nor simple. The profession of executioner in the Holy Roman Empire was hereditary by both tradition and necessity. Few men willingly chose such work, and those who did often found themselves trapped within its bloody boundaries for life. The young Franz, bearing the twin burdens of his father's shame and society's disgust, learned his craft through the most brutal form of apprenticeship imaginable. At 19 years of age, on a June morning in 1573 that would forever mark the beginning of his extraordinary career, Frantz Schmidt climbed the scaffold for his first execution. The condemned was a common thief, and as was customary for such crimes, death would come by hanging. Standing beneath the wooden gallows, with its rough-hewn beams casting long shadows across the execution ground, young Franz felt the weight of ancestral destiny upon his shoulders. In the margin of his meticulous diary, which he would maintain throughout his 45-year career, Franz recorded those first moments with stark simplicity. "My first execution, a thief hanged at Bamberg, was my first execution." These words, preserved through centuries, capture the beginning of what would become the most thoroughly documented career in the annals of judicial execution. The path to Nuremberg's executioner's position was paved with both skill and circumstance. Frantz Schmidt's reputation grew not through mere brutality, but through precision, efficiency, and an almost scholarly approach to his grim profession. By 1578, when he assumed the role of Nuremberg's master executioner, he had already demonstrated the qualities that would define his long career: technical mastery, unwavering reliability, and a meticulous attention to detail that bordered on the obsessive. Nuremberg, one of the Holy Roman Empire's most prosperous and influential free imperial cities, required an executioner whose skills matched its status. The city's complex legal system, its bustling trade routes, and its position as a center of both commerce and justice demanded a practitioner who could handle not merely the crude hangings of common criminals, but the elaborate ceremonial executions of high-profile cases that reflected the city's importance. Frantz Schmidt's tools, methods, and techniques. The appointment of Frantz Schmidt to Nuremberg's executioner position illuminated one of medieval society's most fascinating contradictions. While executioners were universally shunned, considered dishonest by guild law and canon decree, their services were absolutely essential to the maintenance of social order. This paradox created a unique social stratum, men who lived simultaneously within and outside the bounds of respectable society. Contemporary records reveal the complex web of restrictions that governed an executioner's life. As one municipal decree proclaimed, "The executioner and his kin shall not frequent honest taverns, nor touch any goods in the market save with a stick, and no honest craftsman shall work alongside such dishonest persons." Yet the same society that proclaimed such prohibitions depended entirely upon the executioner's expertise to maintain its conception of divine and temporal justice. Frantz Schmidt navigated this social labyrinth with remarkable skill. Unlike many of his contemporaries in the profession who lived as complete outcasts, Schmidt managed to cultivate a degree of grudging respect among Nuremberg's citizens. His meticulous record-keeping, his professional competence, and perhaps most importantly, his apparent moral seriousness about his work elevated him above the typical social standing of his profession. The executioner's dwelling itself reflected this complex social position. Nuremberg provided Schmidt with a house that was substantial enough to reflect his official importance, yet located in a district that maintained appropriate distance from the homes of honest citizens. The house served multiple functions: residence, workshop for the maintenance of execution equipment, and occasional prison for those awaiting their final moments. Frantz Schmidt's professional arsenal reflected the sophisticated hierarchy of punishment that characterized Holy Roman Empire justice. Different crimes demanded different methods of execution, each carrying its own symbolic meaning and social message. Schmidt's mastery lay not merely in his ability to kill efficiently, but in his understanding of the complex legal and social codes that governed how death should be administered. For common criminals, thieves, brigands, and those guilty of lesser felonies, the hangman's noose provided swift justice. Schmidt's technique with the rope was legendary. Contemporary accounts describe executions completed so efficiently that the condemned experienced minimal suffering. One witness recorded, "Master Franz possessed such skill with the rope that death came as swift as a bird's flight, with scarce a struggle from the condemned." Beheading, reserved for criminals of higher social standing or those whose crimes warranted a more honorable death, required the executioner's sword, a weapon that in Schmidt's hands became an instrument of almost surgical precision. The art of beheading demanded not merely strength, but timing, angle, and an intimate understanding of human anatomy. A single poorly executed stroke could transform a dignified death into a grotesque spectacle, bringing shame upon both executioner and condemned. The breaking wheel, employed for the most heinous crimes, represented the ultimate expression of judicial vengeance. This method, which involved systematically breaking the condemned person's limbs before delivering the fatal blow, served as both punishment and public spectacle. Schmidt's mastery of this technique earned him a reputation that extended far beyond Nuremberg's walls. Fire, the punishment reserved for heretics and those whose crimes were considered to corrupt the very fabric of Christian society, required perhaps the greatest psychological fortitude from the executioner. The preparation of the stake, the arrangement of combustible materials, and the management of the crowd during these lengthy executions demanded skills that few men possessed. Inside Frantz Schmidt's stage of horrors. Among the 394 individuals whose lives ended at Frantz Schmidt's hands, 3 cases illuminate the complex nature of justice in late medieval Nuremberg: Nicholas Stuller, George Schöpf, and Hans Fröschel, each representing a different facet of crime, punishment, and the social order that demanded their deaths. Hans Fröschel's execution on May 18, 1591, provides us with the only surviving contemporary portrait of Frantz Schmidt himself. Drawn in the margin of a court record, This sketch captures the moment of beheading with stark efficiency. Frantz, condemned for crimes that the records suggest involved violence and theft, met his death by the sword in what witnesses described as a masterful display of the executioner's art. Nicholas Stüller's case in 1577 represented the most horrific extreme of criminal depravity that medieval society could conceive. Known as Schwarzkräger, Stüller had committed 8 murders alongside his companions Feiler and Görgler von Sundberg, crimes so heinous that they defied comprehension even by the standards of an age accustomed to violence. Schmidt's clinical documentation reveals a pattern of brutality that began with the shooting of a mounted soldier and escalated to unspeakable acts of violence against expectant mothers, crimes that violated not merely human law, but the most fundamental sanctity of life itself. The execution of Stüller required the most extreme punishment available under imperial law, breaking upon the wheel preceded by torture with red-hot tongs. As Schmidt recorded with clinical precision, for these deeds he, Stüller, was drawn out on a sledge at Bamberg, his body torn thrice with red-hot tongs, and then he was executed on the wheel. The elaborately brutal punishment reflected not merely legal vengeance, but society's desperate attempt to restore moral order in the face of acts that seemed to challenge the very foundations of human civilization. George Schöpf's execution on August 10, 1581, illuminated another category of crime that medieval society viewed as fundamentally corrupting: bestiality, or what the records termed unnatural vice. Schöpf, described as a lecher, guilty of beastliness with 4 cows, 2 calves, and a sheep, faced death not merely for his crimes, but for the pollution of the natural order that his actions represented. His beheading at Welln was followed by burning, along with one of the animals involved, in a ritual purification intended to cleanse the community of the corruption his acts had introduced. The Diary of Death. Perhaps Frantz Schmidt's most lasting contribution to historical understanding lies not in his skill with rope and blade, but in his extraordinary commitment to documentation. Throughout his 45-year career, he maintained a detailed diary that recorded not merely the names and methods of execution, but the crimes, circumstances, and often the final words of those who died by his hand. This remarkable document, unique among executioners' records, provides an unparalleled window into the operation of medieval justice. Schmidt's entries reveal a man who saw himself not as a mere killer, but as an essential component of a divinely ordained system of social order. His descriptions of executions are clinical, yet occasionally tinged with what appears to be genuine concern for the spiritual welfare of the condemned. One entry demonstrates this complex perspective. Georg Pran, a thief of no small skill, met his end with considerable courage, commending his soul to God with such fervor that many among the crowd were moved to tears. Such observations suggest that Schmidt viewed his role as encompassing not merely the administration of death, but the facilitation of proper Christian dying. The diary also reveals the bureaucratic complexity of medieval justice. Each execution required extensive preparation, consultations with legal authorities, coordination with religious officials, and careful attention to procedural details that could invalidate the entire process if handled incorrectly. Schmidt's records show a system where justice was elaborate theatre, with each participant playing a carefully scripted role in the maintenance of social order. Through these detailed accounts, we glimpse the humanity that persisted even in the midst of systematic killing. Schmidt recorded instances of last-minute reprieves, detailed the various forms of charitable assistance provided to condemned families, and noted the crowd's reactions to different types of executions. His diary transforms what might otherwise be a simple catalogue of deaths into a complex portrait of a society grappling with questions of justice, mercy, and divine will. The twilight of Frantz Schmidt's career. By 1617, after nearly half a century of service, Frantz Schmidt's hands had grown unsteady, and his famous precision began to show the inevitable effects of age. The man who had once executed criminals with clockwork efficiency now faced the prospect of professional decline, a particular concern for an executioner whose reputation depended entirely upon technical competence. The decision to retire was neither sudden nor simple. Medieval executioners typically served until death, as few alternative occupations were available to men bearing the stigma of their profession. Schmidt's relative prosperity and the grudging respect he had earned within Nuremberg society provided him with options unavailable to most of his professional colleagues. His replacement came from within the traditional channels, another member of the executioner's hereditary caste who could step seamlessly into the role that Schmidt had occupied with such distinction. The transfer of authority was marked by ceremonies that emphasized continuity over change, ensuring that Nuremberg's judicial machinery would continue to function without interruption. In retirement, Schmidt continued to live in Nuremberg, his presence a reminder of the city's commitment to order and his own unique place within its social fabric. Contemporary accounts suggest that he spent his final years in relative comfort, his savings from decades of judicial service providing him with a security that few men of his origins could have imagined. His death in 1634 marked the end of an era in more ways than one. The religious conflicts that would soon engulf the Holy Roman Empire were already beginning to transform the political landscape that had given rise to his profession. The careful balance between imperial authority, municipal independence, and traditional justice that had characterized Schmidt's career was beginning to shift in ways that would ultimately reshape the entire system of criminal punishment. The respect that Schmidt eventually earned within Nuremberg society, grudging though it may have been, testified to the possibility of transcending even the most limiting social categories through exceptional competence and moral seriousness. His career suggests that honor could exist even within officially dishonorable professions, and that society's most despised figures could, through dedication and skill, earn a form of recognition that approached admiration. In an age when justice was brutal and society's needs often demanded terrible sacrifices from individuals, he found a way to serve those needs while maintaining his dignity and ultimately his place in history as more than merely an agent of death, but as a chronicler of his time's deepest struggles with questions of justice, mercy, and the necessary evils that every civilization must somehow accommodate.